Hey, this is Vince Papale. I'm a fellow Hawk brother, and of course I'm the guy from Invincible, and you're listening to Sports and Rants with Brett and Pants right here on 1851, my Hawk brothers, and the Hawk will never die.
And we are live on with former Philadelphia Flyer, 5-time All-Star, and second all-time on the scoring list, Brian Propp. How are you doing today, Brian?
Not so bad. After shoveling for a little while the last couple of days, and my back's a little sore, but it reminds me of days back in Saskatchewan growing up where I had to do that a little bit more often.
Yeah, so this snow's nothing for you, right?
I could say that it was nothing for me when I was younger, but now that I've been in Philadelphia for 35 years, now it's a lot. I'm just like everybody else. It's like I don't want it anymore.
So going off that, what made you stay in the Philadelphia area after retiring from the Flyers?
I think if you look at what Philadelphia has to offer as far as work and opportunities, it's huge. And I grew up in the middle of Saskatchewan, where it's kind of a small rural areas where there wasn't that much to offer. Once I was finished my NHL career, being fortunate enough to play for 11 years with the Philadelphia Flyers and 5 years with some other teams and still stay here in the off season, it just made sense for me to stay in the area to continue working and living here.
Have you been keeping up with the Flyers this season? Have you been following them?
I usually follow the Flyers because, for 9 years I did the radio for the team from 99 to 2008. I think we all love the Philadelphia Flyers in our area, and my family enjoys them. A lot of fans enjoy them, and I know that they're pursuing that last playoff spot. So it's pretty intense the last 15, 16 games that they have left.
What's your thoughts on the job your former teammate Ron Hextall has done with the squad?
I think that it's hard to tell in 1 year because you really can't really see what he's put his mark on. And he had the draft last year, which is where he gets a chance to start drafting the players that he likes and kind of assemble the team the way that he thinks that can help them win. I think if you look at they have a couple of really good young defensemen in the minors, giving them a chance to play there and mature is something that he had success with the Los Angeles Kings. And as a result, I think that he's trying to give them a little more playing time in the minors before he calls them up to the NHL.
Now, when you're watching these games, what's the biggest difference that you see in today's NHL from the time when you played?
Well, I think it was a little tougher when we played because there was a lot more cross-checking, hooking, holding in front of the net, and today they're not allowed to really hook or hold or be as physical in front of the net. So I think that rebounds are probably a little bit easier for people to get around and get good opportunities. There seems to be more power plays called in the hockey games where the players are able to get more opportunities on the power play. But overall, I think it's such a great sport, and you have some of the best players in the world that are playing there. It seems that more of the teams are more equal than maybe when we played it in the early 80s where there were some unbalanced teams.
Do you think that players have it easier today because, as you were talking about, it's less violent or a lot more tougher in your time?
Well, I think it's still difficult because there's so much pressure with so many players trying to get your position, and they're making good money today, so everybody's looking at that. And for some reason, I think that that might cause a couple of hits from behind where players aren't as respectful of other players because they're looking at the money that they might be able to make. So I think doesn't seem to be that same respect that there was back in the 70s and 80s where players wouldn't do that or they'd be policed by the players on their own team.
Now, getting into it, how you started playing hockey, growing up in Saskatchewan, is that something everybody did? Was it just a part of the culture?
Yeah, if you ever went to Saskatchewan, you'd know why you play hockey because it usually would snow on Halloween night and then get pretty cold early on in the year, and then by December it was really cold, and you'd be skating outdoors on the ponds and on the lakes, and then when your natural ice was cold enough to build your indoor rinks in the middle of December, then you'd go to there, and then you go right until the end of March. So being mostly rural area and a lot of farms, that's pretty much what the main sport was for 8 months out of the year. And in Canada, hockey tends to be more of the national sport compared to here, where you've got football and baseball and basketball and other major sports. And that's where just growing up, if you didn't play hockey, you probably were a really good student because you wanted to go to college somewhere and at least get out of there.
Did you always want to be an NHL player growing up?
Yeah, no, I didn't really have that same thought process as a lot of people. I think that I just enjoyed the game, and I had a chance to play with. If we could grab enough people in our town, we only had 300 people in our town. So if we were able to grab enough kids our own age, we were able to put together a team. So I was fortunate that in my class, because most classes in our school were about 15 or 10 people per grade. That was it. I mean, so we had about 5 or 6 boys, which was nice because that pretty much at least let us have a team in the different sports. And then I would always play with some older groups too. But I didn't really think about it when I was younger. And then when I was able to play for the Melville Millionaires when I was 15 and did pretty well, jumped to the Brandon Wheat Kings for 3 years, where we had a powerful team. I think it was my second year in Brandon when I won the Western Hockey League scoring that I started to think that, hey, listen, I feel pretty comfortable that I might have a good chance in the NHL. So that I didn't really think of it as much when I was younger, but as I got a little older and continued in hockey, then it became more of a reality.
During your junior hockey career, was there any coach that helped your growth and showed that you had potential?
I think we had really good coaching when I was young. From young on, my father was always a good coach and just taught the basics of the game and the sportsmanship and everything that was going on. When I was with the Melville Millionaires, I had a coach called Jerry James. Now, Jerry James won a Stanley Cup with the Toronto Maple Leafs and also won a Grey Cup, which is the Canadian Football League. He was a kicker there. So he won, two of the biggest awards in hockey and football in Canada. So, and I feel that as he learned from the football side of things, the way that they analyze things and really break things down, that he brought to the Melville Millionaires a system of teaching that was far beyond the years at the time. He had plays set up. He had everybody learn them. He kind of made sure that everybody understood that you could call out different numbers like a quarterback would from your own zone as far as to what the breakout should be, and his physical workout was a lot more than what most other coaches had at that time. So Jerry James really brought a lot of discipline and playmaking to the entire team, and for me as a 15-year-old. And then when I went to the Brandon Wheat Kings, had Doug McCollum, who was a 15-year NHL player, ex-player, that really was a lot like Pat Quinn when I first came to the Flyers. Like, he really taught the players well. He got them ready for the NHL and really taught them the ways of life and what to expect.
In 1999, you received the honor of being the best left wing in Canadian junior hockey. With that being said, did it surprise you when you were drafted 14th overall by the Flyers?
I think if you look back at the draft in 1979, there were a couple of things that made a difference as far as where I was drafted. First of all, the World Hockey Association and the NHL merged that year. So that took away any bargaining power. And they also threw back in players that were playing in the World Hockey Association, and they changed the draft from a 20-year-old draft to an 18-year-old draft. So right off the bat, you had two leagues merged into one. You threw into the mix players that were playing in the World Hockey Association and another year younger. So as a result, there were a couple of younger players that were drafted ahead of me, and one of them was one of my line mates, Laurie Boschman, went to Toronto Maple Leafs, and another one was Ray Bourque that year. And a lot of the World Hockey Association guys that played in the pro systems the year before were drafted a little bit ahead of me. But I just looked at it as, hey, listen, the later I was in the draft, the more established team I was going to be involved with, and the Flyers had great leadership, and I just looked at it as, hey, listen, I can fit in there, and we're probably not going to struggle to get into the playoffs, and that was kind of a blessing.
Coming to Philadelphia, did you know anything about the area, or was it a culture shock for you?
For me, it was a little bit of a culture shock because Brandon was about 240,000 people. That's the biggest city I was in, and when I came to Philadelphia, it was a learning experience because you're not used to the size and the speed of the city, and that's where players like Bob Kelly and a Frank Bays and Mel Bridgman and Bill Barber, Bobby Clark, and Rick McLeish, they helped ease me in by helping me get around and learning what the city was like, being really good teammates that made my transition a little bit easier. And then so all I had to really do was kind of worry about just playing hockey and doing a good job there, and if I did that well, then everything else would kind of fall into place.
Speaking of players like Bobby Clark, Bill Barber, for you, what was it like going into the locker room, seeing those names on the jersey, and interacting with these guys for the first time?
Well, I think that everybody knew about Bob Clark and Bill Barber because they had won the Stanley Cups in '74 and '75, and you were such a quality physical team that everybody heard about them. But I think when I met them, a lot of the guys on the team were from Saskatchewan or played in the leagues that I had played in. And I wasn't intimidated by them because it didn't really matter. I always had the confidence from the coaches that had coached me before that I knew that I could fit right in and I could be a good teammate on the team. So I think that rather than being in awe when I went in to meet those people, I just did my job and worked hard and became became a name myself rather than looking in awe.
You've mentioned how these established players helped you with the transition into the NHL and in Philadelphia. Did you learn anything in particular from them, maybe leadership?
I think you always find leadership from great leaders like that, and I was always a leader in my junior team and even the Melville Millionaires. So you have a couple of years where I was pretty quiet for the press people. I didn't really say too much. My answers were pretty short, but we had the leaders that they could always go to after they left after 4 or 5 years, and I was part of the team that was a little bit older that took over the reins and was one of the leaders in the room. You lead by example, and that's the way that Bob Clark always was. He practiced as hard as he played, and I was the same way, and a few of the other guys like Mark Powell were the same way, Brad McCrimmon. We had a group of guys that understood the value of working hard in practice, and working hard during the game, staying together, having a lot of fun together, but nothing beats winning, and the reason that we were there is to get into the playoffs and give yourself a chance at winning the Stanley Cup for Philadelphia.
As we all know, Flyers fans can be unrelenting and unforgiving. Coming in as a 14th overall pick, did you feel pressure from that fan base?
I don't think I felt as much pressure as the guys that were drafted the year before. That was Ben Wilson and Kenny Linsman. I think they were drafted a little bit higher, and there were higher expectations that these guys should be much better players. And I just looked at it as, listen, I'm going to be out there. I know what I have to do, and I'm going to play hard, and I'm going to do the right things. And I'm going to be a team player, and you give your 100% effort. It's just like everybody today in any business or anything that you do. You give your best effort, and people will understand and value that.
Could you just take us into that first full season in the NHL? What was the whole experience like for you, and how was it different from hockey you played before?
Well, you have to remember that when I was my last year with the Brandon Wheat Kings, out of 72 games, we only lost 5. So I was pretty used to winning, and I remember the first game in Philadelphia, we beat the Islanders, and I scored a goal. It was a game winner, and we won that. And then we went to Atlanta, who was in the league at the time, and we lost 9-2. And I was thinking to myself, wow, is this what the NHL is going to be like? And then after that, we went on a 35-game undefeated streak, which is still a professional sports record, which it really was an amazing run for us to go 35 without a loss. But that was 4 balanced lines. So right off the bat, you can't really ask for a better start to a season. Pete Peters was a rookie also that year with me, and he did wonderfully. But that was a great start. And then in the playoffs, we were able to get through the first rounds and go all the way to the finals against the New York Islanders. And unfortunately, we lost in overtime in Game 6. But for the first year in the league, sometimes it can be a little bit of a dream where everything kind of falls into place, and then then after that you gotta keep up with it and keep those expectations at the same level.
Why do you think you weren't able to get over that hump and win the Stanley Cup in that first season as a team?
Well, I think that we went all the way to it was Game 6 and it was in overtime when we lost. If it goes back to Game 7 back in Philadelphia, we probably win, because in those days when you played in your own building, you almost were sure to win. So I think getting there, and the league is still pretty difficult. Just to get to the finals is really a tremendous feat. It's very, very difficult, and to win is even harder. So it could be the bounce of a puck, or it could be just a couple of things. But we were there first year, and then that just helped me to try to get back there again.
Yeah, speaking of getting back there again, you went to the Stanley Cup 5 times in your career, 3 of which was with the Flyers. How much did you want to bring a cup to Philadelphia?
Well, starting here and being here for 11 years, I think you want to win for every team that you're playing for. But for me, this was my my home, being here for so long. And after the first year, we ended up losing to the Rangers a couple times in the first rounds, and that was not acceptable. I mean, we still were in the playoffs, but you just learn that hey, this is when it all counts. And fortunately for me, then we were able to get all the way back into the finals in '85 with Pelle Lindbergh, and we had a banged up team. We weren't real healthy, and lost to the Edmonton Oilers, who really had started to create quite a powerhouse for themselves. And then back in '87, we got all the way to the finals and to Game 7 against the Edmonton Oilers again. So I think that people don't understand how difficult it is to get to the finals, and they sometimes forget that even winning that first series is very difficult, much less the second and third to get there. But as we had good leadership, we were in the playoffs every single year, and we always were giving ourselves and our city a chance to win the Stanley Cup.
Throughout your career, you played with some great line mates. Who would you say was your favorite to play with that led you to being able to be second all-time on the Flyers list for goals?
Well, I think that was just a drive that I had, and but looking at probably the mid-'80s when I was playing with Dave Poulin and Tim Kerr, that probably was where we were known as the top line for the Flyers, and having a guy like a Tim Kerr that could score on the power play and regular, and Dave Poulin and I killed penalties. That was probably the time where in the mid-'80s we might have been some of the best penalty killing units in the league, and then on the power play we were one of the top power play units in the league. And so when you have line mates like that, with the Mark Howe and recruitment back on points, it's pretty powerful, and those are the times that you remember the most.
Now, in the NHL, being a one-time All-Star is an accomplishment, but you were a 5-time All-Star in the NHL. Were the experiences ever different? What was it like interacting with some of the best players in hockey during the time?
Yeah, you always look at the All-Star game as quite a compliment to get there, and so for me getting there 5 times, it just is such an honor. And I think that as I was getting along in my career, even anytime you get on at that point, it's just like you know that your career is going to end sometime, so it makes it more special. Just like later in your career, you realize that you're not going to get a chance to win a Stanley Cup every single season. So you start understanding, that every game means so much. And but yeah, hanging out with some of the best players and playing with them in those games was fabulous. Although I remember back in the 80s that games were a lot lower scoring because there was like that competition that you really wanted to win the hockey game, and so it's a little different now when you see guys that just don't really try, and it's like I feel sorry for the goalies.
Now I have to ask you, one of the most memorable moments in Flyers history was when Ron Hextall went after Chris Chelios for the hit he laid on you. Did you ever thank Hextall for that?
I think you don't even have to, because you're teammates. And we all understood why he did that. That was in '89. We were going to the conference finals just after beating out Pittsburgh. In Game 1 in Montreal, Chelios levels me with a hit from behind, an elbow to the head, knocked me out. At that point, I was the leading scorer in the playoffs. And we all know that it was on purpose, and he's even told the referee that game that it was. It was a nasty, nasty hit, and then I was back playing even later in that series when it was the Game 6 when we were losing a little bit at home and running out of time, and Hextall kind of went after Chelios just because he was so upset that nothing had happened to him at that point. So it just shows you the leadership of your goaltender. So we all know why he did it, and for me, it was Ron Hextall sticking up for me. That is a memory that I'll have for the rest of my life, and that's why he's in a position he is, because he cares so much about his team.
Now the Flyers, going off that, the Flyers culture is known for fighting, being tough guys. What was that locker room like, and was that an expectation of you coming into the Flyers?
I think every team had some fighters there, and the Flyers were one of the toughest teams around at that time. My role was to score goals. I mean, I had a chippy edge to me. I wasn't going to back down from anybody. I kind of fit the Flyers' character and mold. It's just kind of nice when you have guys like Ben Wilson and Dave Brown and Darryl Stanley and Mel Bridgman and Bob the Hound Kelly and Dave. Well, Dave Schultz had left the year before, but having players like that around you, it always helps as a scorer. Now,
you'd move on and go to the Bruins and then the North Stars. How has that changed from leaving the Philadelphia area after playing 11 seasons here, as you said? What was that change like?
Well, at that point, I already had played 11 years in the league with the Flyers, and when I ended up getting traded in the late of the season of 1990, I had a hand injury. I had my artery taken out of my hand and grafted in a vein, so I missed about 25 games. And the Flyers, were just kind of on the bubble at that point, and Bob Clark was there, and I had seen that he had traded a few other players. He had traded Dave Poulin in January. So when I was called in and was traded to the Boston Bruins, I looked at it as, hey, Boston's the number one team in the league. I looked at it a little bit like people are looking at Kimmo Timonen getting traded to Chicago because they're a quality playoff team. They know that it's almost like a favor to Kimmo Timonen, and that's kind of what I looked at Bob Clark doing for me there, and as a result, it worked pretty well, where we went all the way to the finals that year again, and I was a free agent. Bob Clark gets fired. He goes to the GM of Minnesota and understood the type of player I was as a leader, and he brought me to Minnesota because I was a free agent, and he also brought in Bobby Smith, another leader, and you bring a couple of leaders to a hockey club, and suddenly, then they're much better, and bang, next year we went to the Stanley Cup Finals again with them.
You had a very great career, a very accomplished career. What would you say has been your most memorable moment in hockey and your favorite accomplishment?
Well, I think that everybody always, you want to win, and so giving your team the chance to win is something that when events happen, those are things that you remember. So I remember probably my best playoff game was Game 5 in Edmonton in 1987 when we were trailing that series 3-1, and it was 3-2, and I had 4 assists, and we won 4-3. And, Game 6, I think most people remember in Philadelphia when we ended up beating Edmonton 3-2 to force Game 7. And in that game, I scored, a goal to tie the game with about 6 minutes left, and then J.J. Daniel scored 3 minutes later. But, I'll never forget scoring the tying goal and then J.J. scoring after, how loud the spectrum was. It felt like the building was going to come down. So, you remember those moments. That's the playoffs. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in the NHL is my playoff points. I'm rated the top left winger in the history of the game for points by a left winger, which is pretty astounding. And also in the regular season, I'm pretty proud of being a really good two-way player. I'm 10th overall in the history of the game for forwards in plus minus, and as we all know, that's a huge stat for playing 5-on-5 compared to power play.
Before we get into your post-NHL career, we got to finish up your hockey career with, where did you come up with that celebration of yours?
The guffaw, which everybody can read the whole story on my brianpropp.com website. I've got a little tab that people can read about the guffaw story, but that came from Howie Mandel. Howie Mandel, the Canadian comedian, he used shows in Atlantic City, and when he was in Atlantic City, I would go with my friend Scott McKay. Scott McKay and I were at the show, and we saw Howie during halfway through the show go, "Hey, you guys want to mess up the next comedian?" And everyone's like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, rather than clap, cheer, whistle, everybody just do this, guffaw, guffaw." And he'd take his arm and do, kind of make it go up to the sky, and he'd say, "Wouldn't that be funny if you did that rather than clap, cheer, or whistle?" And so that summer, Scott was on the beach patrol in Ocean City, New Jersey, and I'd go up to him and say, "Guffaw," rather than hello. And I said, "Hey, I need more personality when I score goals. I'm going to start that next year." So as a result, the next year came by, and I started scoring goals, and I started doing the guffaw after, and it kind of became a branded thing that I did.
All right, so you've done a lot since retiring from the NHL. As you said, you did commentating with the Flyers. What are you doing today?
Today, I'm working with a company called Wolf Commercial Real Estate, helping develop Pennsylvania and New Jersey, just, people that have commercial real estate needs. Very good, young, energetic, kind of a hockey team type group where we're hungry, and we service and make sure that everything we do is the best we can perform at. So that's just Wolf Commercial Real Estate. And then also I'm got another opportunity. I'm working with car dealerships where a company called Smart Payment Plan will go into the dealerships, and we partner with them so that, say, for instance, you go to buy a car, you end up, looking at the loan. What we can do is often you get paid. We can create smaller payments for you, the customer, which will help you budget, and then we just take it out of your checking or savings account like an ACH draw, which helps pay down the car a little quicker. It's convenient so that you don't have to write checks every couple of weeks probably, and you're creating equity in your car. So those are a couple of things that I'm up to right now.
And before we let you go, would you like to give our listeners the name of your website again?
My website's pretty easy. It's brianpropp.com. And you can go there, and then from that you can get onto my Twitter, my Facebook fan page, LinkedIn. Check it all out. There's, I usually have ways that I can help companies save money just through a lot of relationships over the years.
Well, Brian, thank you for joining us today. We appreciated your time, and we learned a lot about the NHL today and a lot about your career.
Awesome. Good luck, guys, at St. Joe's.
Thank you.
All right.
This concludes our podcast of Sports and Rants with Brent and Pants. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Twitter at Sports and Rants. Like us on Facebook. Remember to subscribe to us on iTunes. And visit our website, www.sportsandrantz.blogspot.com. It would help our rankings on iTunes if you rate and review our podcast. Thanks, and have a good day.